I'm Nancy Harrington. It's May 25th, 2011. I'm conducting an interview with Michael Patrick King on behalf of the Archive of American Television in Burbank, California. Okay, so we like to start out just getting a little background for about 10 minutes time. What was your name at birth?
My name at birth is Michael Patrick King. My confirmation name, as I was raised Irish Catholic, is Michael Patrick Francis King. I am the third Michael King. My grandfather on my father's side was Michael King Sr. My father was Michael King Jr. That makes me Michael King III, which I dropped because when you're a story editor in Hollywood, you really can't have a third after your name.
And did you always use the Patrick?
I actually started using Patrick when I joined Actors Equity. But I'm really happy I did because it really sort of made me really define myself by my full name, and also really brought up my Irish heritage, which is kind of a big part of my sensibility, I think, for better or for worse.
And when and where were you born?
I was born in Scranton, Pennsylvania, September the 14th, 1954. I was just shy of a preemie. I was so little when I was born that they actually left me in the hospital. So I guess my first laughs were at my expense. I turned that around.
You mentioned your Irish heritage and sensibility. What does that mean? Can you talk a little bit about that?
I think, first of all, I'm from a long line of Irish people, which on both sides. My mother's name was Murray and my father's name was King. And of course, there's a Fitzsimmons and a Judge. So every name you can find in my family is 100% Irish. I mean, it really goes from the ridiculous to the sublime. I mean, the ridiculous would be the ritualistic dyeing of my father's hair on St. Patrick's Day with green food coloring, which shows that my father and my family sort of enjoyed an event or creating some sort of altered reality or participating in a big party. That sense of the Irish. And then on the other side, the more sublime side, I think, is the storytelling side. And the deep, deep well of feeling. And the other great thing, if you can overcome it, is this feeling of not being chosen, which is being the outsider. You know, the whole Irish need not apply from the Great Depression, and just really, really comfortable being the victim in society and sort of having to fight your way out to be the one that's chosen. So there's a great legacy of my people, and by people I mean my family, being comfortable in an uncomfortable way with the ones that weren't chosen, the ones that weren't fancy, the ones that weren't invited to the party first. You know what I mean? There's the whole thing about, you know, the Irish were invited to clean up after. So that's in my DNA, even though it's not particularly in my immediate family, that the sense of, I want to say like a little bit of a wound, like a bruise that you can occasionally push on that's like, oh, I'm not enough. It's actually, I believe, in the people. I do. And also, it's also formed an enormous part of my character, which is that I have never had a drink in my life. I've never had a drink because there's an enormous amount of drinking in my family, which affected me very strongly early on, where I was just like, that's not good. And I knew that I didn't want to do that. And my mother never drank, so I sort of went that way. My father did drink. So my mother's brother drank. I mean, there was a lot of random drinking. And so what it meant to me was a sort of lack of discipline that I got very early in a very profound way, that if I wanted to do something with my life, it shouldn't be with liquor. It should not have liquor involved. And to tell you the absolute truth, and this is, I'm not kidding you, at 13 I saw Valley of the Dolls on television, and I had a thought, yeah, I better never drink. I knew I was going to go into show business at a very early age. And I always thought, this is going to be rough, up and down, up and down. And so I sort of, aside from the fact that I saw a lot of people losing control around me, I just didn't think it was right for me. And I do think it's in the genes.
And what was your father's full name and what did he do?
Michael Francis King. My father we were lower to middle class. My father had many jobs growing up. The two most profound jobs I can tell you is he delivered coal. Coal. Yes, I'm from Scranton, Pennsylvania, so it's a big coal town. He delivered a coal truck and he delivered beer. So that'll tell you the working class Irish family I'm from. And my mother ran a Krispy Kreme. So I'm from coal and donuts.
And did you watch a lot of TV as a kid?
I did.
What
I
were your
think we
favorite
did.
shows?
I remember there are a couple of shows that come out at me. I remember as a very young kid, Captain Kangaroo, and thinking Mr. Green Jeans was boring. I didn't understand that. But I did get the Captain Kangaroo of it all. There was a marionette show that was on at Christmas time that I was fascinated by. They told the story of the night before Christmas. It was for Bell Telephone, Pennsylvania. And they did marionette show, but with the night before Christmas and also the Nativity. So that was like the biggest show for me. Of course, The Wizard of Oz, who didn't. But I always was very aware that, when they're leaving Munchkinland and they just stop before the drop, I was very aware they couldn't walk through that. Like, they have to go to commercial now, because I didn't understand that it was an actual film cut, because I never seen the movie without commercials, because it was on TV. But I did always know that at that point, they're going to have to go to a commercial, because they can't keep going. And then one of the significant shows to me was Lost in Space, because of the Billy Mumy character who played Will Robinson, because we were roughly the same age. But I remember thinking, I want to be Billy Mumy. I don't want to be Lost in Space. I don't want to be Will Robinson. I want to be the kid pretending to be Will Robinson. I knew what I wanted to do. I remember when I came to college, I applied to Juilliard in New York City, and under financial aid, the line on the brochure said, there are a variety of part-time jobs available in the New York City area. So that wasn't happening. So I wound up going to a very bizarre college in Erie, Pennsylvania called Mercyhurst College. It's a very small liberal arts college that had a theater program, but I went there because this girl, Bridget Cusick, was going there. And I thought she was cool, or maybe I thought I had a crush on her. I don't think I had a crush on her. I think she just thought, well, Bridget's going there, it'll be fun. And so I actually applied there, probably because I heard she probably wasn't a good student either. And I thought, I could go there, and I thought I was going to be a theater major. But it was so half-assed, the decision. It was truly half-assed. Because when we went to the school to meet the school after I had already applied and it was accepted, I remember going into the dean with my parents to do my conversation, and I asked him how the theater department was. He said, it's okay. It's not like you're going to make a life out of it. And I thought, I didn't think this out well. But what turned out, it was a really great place for me to go, because the theater department was tiny, tiny, tiny. And Erie, Pennsylvania had 5 theaters. There were 3 colleges and a dinner theater and a community theater. So it was really good I went there, because it was a lot of attention and there wasn't enough competition to not get work, and the thrust of doing it and being social, and I did plays everywhere. And I left after 3 years because I really didn't want to keep paying, didn't have any money. I had to get a job at a bank in the middle of my sophomore year because I ran out of money. And I always knew at college that it was going to be, if I was going to teach, it would be because of who I was and what I had done, not because of where I went to school. And certainly I knew that no liberal arts theater degree from Mercyhurst College was going to be my fallback position. I knew that it wasn't really happening. And I also was very, very driven in getting to New York and making it, the abstract phrase, but literally that's what went through my mind all the time. You got to make it, you got to make it, you got to make it. And at that point I was thinking I was going to be an actor.
So you moved to New York, and you moved to New York in the 80s.
Yes.
And you start doing stand-up? How does that happen?
It didn't happen that quickly. I moved to New York. I had no job. I didn't know anyone. My first job, I had connections at Greyhound. So I started unloading buses from 5 at night to 3 in the morning. And I didn't know anyone. And I studied at Lee Strasberg's Institute. And they would say to me, and now we're all going to cry. And I just burst into tears. They're like, you're good. But it never worked. I waited on tables for 100 years. I was a pretty good actor, but it just wasn't the thing. I could do it, and I was very involved in the quest. I waited on tables forever, constantly driven. I waited on tables at night, and I would work, 11 at night till 6 in the morning. And then I remember, even when I would take a nap in the afternoon, I would have the thought, if you're taking a nap, you're not going to make it. You've got to get going. You've got to go. So I did everything I could, every theater company for free, off Broadway, everything. And then I wound up going into an improv troupe. And that is the first time where I thought, this is what I do. This is it. Right off the top of my head, really funny, energy. I liked the ideas. The first place I felt lightning hit me, as though there's something here that's really special. And from the improv troupe, I went into a comedy team with Lisa Mende. We were King and Mende. And we did all the circuits, the comedy club circuits. It's the first time in my career I had made money. Literally, it's the first time I had to deal with making money, where I'd be on the back porch of like a club on Staten Island saying to a guy with a broken nose, you said 300. And him saying, but you only did 20 minutes. I said, but you said 300. The first time I actually had to deal with commerce for my work. And we played Vegas. It was the height of our career. We played the Riviera Hotel in Vegas, and the only thing bigger than our name on the marquee was Gourmet Buffet $9.95. And after Vegas, we split. And I said to the Silver Friedman, who was the sort of genius woman who ran the improv in New York and had been there from the beginning, I said, now that, because that was our home club, and we did really well. There's 3 levels of stand-up, C, B, and A. When you're an A act, you get the best spot. So the two of us were very interestingly successful as a comedy team. So then I said, I want to do stand-up. And she said to me, do you have 5 minutes? Do you have a good 5 minutes? And I was like, no problem. Well, I could write 35 minutes. But what I discovered was being on stage for 5 minutes and being good was entirely different than writing. The stuff I wrote starting as a stand-up was probably better than the stuff I wound up doing when I ended, but I didn't have the confidence to do it. It was too smart or too something. But so I worked at the club on the door and did stand-up late. And I was in, I think of the comedy clubs in New York as like a high school, and so you have a freshman class, because there's usually a span of 4 years in a club. So in my class, the freshman class, were Ray Romano and Jon Stewart, and Jerry Seinfeld was like a junior, that class. And Colin Quinn was in my class, and Dave Attell was like a junior high. So there was a great, interesting journey there, because I was still in the closet. I hadn't come out yet as a gay man. And so for me, the struggle of being on stage and not knowing what people are going to say about you, coming out of the dark, was very aggressive moving forward. Like, I really had to work on that.
What was your act like?
I'll do my first joke. It's visual. This is what I used to open with. My name is Michael Patrick King, which means I'm Irish American, which means in 4 years my face will look exactly like this. Now it's not so funny because my face looks like that. But when I started my act, it was hilarious. I used to say my uncles look like pumpkins 4 days after Halloween. So I did a lot of material about that. I was okay. I could do well, but it was really not I wasn't telling my truth. I was making an audience laugh. And I wound up being the guy who sat in the back of the clubs and made everybody else's sets work.
And so moving into your early television work, what was your first job in TV besides Merv?
My very first job in television as a writer was writing sketches for the Carolines Comedy Hour, which was a comic show that was produced on A&E. And what they did was they'd have 3 stand-ups and a host. And then I was hired with Jon Stewart. I hired him. And we would write the little bumpers in between, the little comedy vignettes that weren't stand-up. And we had no money. to hire actors. And it was Caroline's at the Seaport in New York. It was at the South Street Seaport, which is a fish market, famous for its fish market. So what we wound up doing was, one of the sketches we did was we put fish on ice and we put thread through their jaws, and then puppets with fish, but then did funny dialogue, like fishes talking about what life was about. And so that was like our first camera above just doing fish. So that was my first thing, writing sketches. It was the first time I had worked with what wound up being sort of a theme, which is like writing for a woman. Carol Leifer was the host. So it was the first time I had been writing that. But before I got that gig, when I was doing everything else, I started to write plays. I got into the Circle Rep Company in this alternative smaller group, not the chosen ones, the outside ones. You see the thread? Like, we got to get into the good group. We're not the good group, but it makes you work harder. And I started writing a play, and the first one-act play I wrote, the minute I wrote it, it immediately got response. Much differently than anything I'd ever gotten when I was in acting. And I remember thinking, oh, this is going to be the way it goes. It was a play called One Act. It was a play called Workout. It was a one act about a mother and a daughter trying to work out a problem in an aerobic studio. And the minute I wrote it, it was read, and then it was done that summer at a theater. So it was like, oh, that's the path. And I was a little bit hesitant to follow it at first, but then it went into Caroline's Comedy Hour. It was fun. And I also made up this significant rule then that I'm still following to this day. I just remembered it to follow it again, which is follow the green lights. There's a lot of yellow lights in the world where people are not quite sure about a direction, or red lights, which don't go that way. When I was an actor, I remember thinking, like, after a play, no matter how good I was, or I felt that there was always a question. And then after I did comedy, people would just be smiling. And I thought, yeah, follow the green lights. Go where it's open towards you. And so once the playwriting started and the writing started, that was really the direction. And I was always doing that anyway. I just didn't really understand that that was the route.
And then there was a show called The Sweet Life.
Sweet Life was my first understanding of what television is. Carolyn Strauss, who later went on to run HBO, through its heyday, right under Chris Albrecht, she hired me again on the Sex and the City later. But there was a show called The Sweet Life, and the Comedy Channel was the forerunner to Comedy Central. And it was owned by HBO, and it was an experiment to create a lot of programming, almost like radio, but on television. So there was one studio, and there were like 6 sets in it, and you would share 3 hours of time every day. And the shows were comedy shows built around free clip packages, much like MTV was built around free songs. So they would do these clip packages of classic comedies or promos for new comedies, and you would have a host, and there was this show that wasn't working for them, and it was called The Sweet Life, and it was hosted by Rachel Sweet, who used to be a big pop singer when she was 16, and now was this interesting comic girl. And it wasn't working for them. And so I got a call from Carolyn saying to me, take a look at these tapes, VHS tapes, because it wasn't even on the air yet. Something's not working here, and we want you to say what you would do. So I remember I put in the tapes in my VCR, which of course was like this big. I was like putting in these VHS tapes. And I saw this show that was, it was too toney, it was too intellectual. Here was this girl, and they were doing these weird things about Greek tragedy and stuff, and I was like, oh, I know what to do. You make it more about her. So I remember I called Carolyn up, and I said, I have some, ideas. And then the head of the network, Stu Smiley, called me up and said on the phone, what are your ideas? And I go, now? He goes, right now, you have 5 minutes. And so I told him some ideas, and he said, okay, come and see me. And I was hired to be the new executive producer and turn that show around. Now, what I learned at this job was the pressure's always the same, but your lungs get bigger and bigger at the altitude. You can sort of handle it more, but it's always the same. Is it working? How fast can you make it work? Dealing with a star, creating writing with a team, and also dealing with the stress. Stress. never quite knowing what you're doing, but you're doing it anyway, because it's like it's always a little bit outside of your skill level what you're doing. It's always, if it's something new, you don't quite know what it is, so you never really master it. You're always trying to reach for it. So I went into this job, and I was an executive producer of a television show, and I remember I was making enough money. I was making $1,000 a week, which was insane. So much so that I would buy a different suit to wear to work the next week at like a $99 should have been 99-cent suit store. Like I'd come in a mustard suit. What? Like that was my treat to myself. I'm a grown-up with ties. And so the show wasn't working, but here's the great story. The other executive producer was still there. There was a crossover of 2 weeks, and that was my first experience in someone yelling at me in television. Because I thought I was there to do a job, and I didn't understand that I was not supposed to do that job well for a week and a half. And I was supposed to wait and play this game of having sort of ideas, but I thought I was there like, go, you're in charge. So I went in, and I was really nice, but I started saying what I thought, and I got pulled into his office, and the door was slammed. My like second day there, and he started screaming at me, I'm the executive producer, I'm the executive producer. And there was like foam. And I remember on his desk, it was the first time I'd ever seen vodka with a plant inside. I'd never seen like infused vodka before, but there was this big bottle of vodka with a potato plant in it. And he was screaming, I'm the executive producer, I'm the executive producer. And I thought, I don't even know what to do with this. This is like, this is an alien. And I'm bad suddenly. I'm bad. And it was this weird thing that has happened to me over and over. There's always, I'm the executive producer moment, whether they're saying, I'm the something moment. There's always a I'm the something moment in show business. And I didn't understand it. And now I understand. He was humiliated, dethroned, frustrated, threatened, didn't like me. And he went on to have a nice career himself, by the way, but I'm not going to say his name. And then I hired John and Stewart and Becky Hartman Edwards and a couple other writers, and we began to slowly change the shape of the show, which was really just like personality writing. Like, who's Rachel, figuring out who she was, and then finding a way to craft a character monologue around that, which is sort of what I think all writing on series is. Like, what's the character? What does the actor do well? Craft something around it. And so it was a great struggle. Because it wasn't really working, because nothing was working, by the way. And I remember us being in the studio, and there was a studio door with a window in it, and you'd see the next show like you're behind already. So there was like another element of like time. Might as well have been the studio or my mother, someone telling me you're got to get going, get back to what you're supposed to be doing. But this combination of schedule, pressure, and still trying to create something that worked, that's new and arty. That's every job I've ever had. And I finally quit that job. And I was just thinking that when I saw like I'm going to be talking about this, I quit that job without another job. Because I woke up one day and my entire eyelid had hemorrhaged. It was purple. I had exploded a blood vessel in my rest state. And I thought to myself, that's not good. And also there was a door open that I was in this theater company, and they were actually having their first season of summer theater, and I was going to be the playwright in residence. So I chose to leave television and my purple eyelid and go on to theater, back to the theater. And it was interesting because I was the only one who was doing theater that summer for the joy of doing theater. Everybody else was worrying about what they were getting afterwards. And I had an experience where I was just doing the theater for the theater. And I wrote my first big play that was panned by the New York Times for that summer. But this eyelid showed up in my very first episode of Murphy Brown that I wrote. Miles came in with an eye patch, and they called him Captain Bloodclot, the corporate pirate, because he actually said my eyelid hemorrhaged in my rest state. So, I mean, it's just a great example of like whatever happens, just keep using it. But I left that job without another job. But it was a big job in terms of, it's like mountain climbing, really. That was a big mountain. Now I've been on bigger mountains, but it's still the same climb.
And then you moved on to My Talk Show. Can you talk about that, the
Yeah.
premise of it?
So I was in New York after the season, after I quit the Comedy Channel and did theater. I came back to New York, and I got a call from my friend Cynthia Stevenson, who was an actress that I had met in California because she was the girlfriend of my college friend, and she was an actress. And she got this show called My Talk Show, which was a strip show, meaning it was a half an hour, 5 days a week, produced by the Second City people. And it was on like Channel 11. It was syndicated. And the idea was a woman from Ohio had a talk show coming out of her living room. So it was sort of Fernwood Tonighty, if you know what that means, but it was also kind of touching the beginning of what reality television sort of eventually became. I'm a celebrity and I'm a really nobody. So she called me up and she said, they can't write for me. They can't write for me. No one can write for me. Will you write me a spec script of my talk show? And I said, I don't even know what it is. She said, well, it's a woman in Ohio, and she has her own talk show. And I go, I don't want to come to California. In the meantime, I'm just, something took over. And I had a computer. My apartment in New York was literally so small that I could go like that and then go over there and go like that. It was one room. I called it the doorway to hell. And I was at my desk, and I had one of the old Macs, you know, the kind with that front-loading disc. And I remember the keys just banging this. Like I typed a spec script of a show I'd never seen in like 48 hours, just like this. While telling her I wasn't going to come to California, something took over. I just started going like this and typing this show. A couple of the comic friends I had, Mike Rowe, who was a comedy friend in New York, had come out to California. And at the same time this was happening, I was talking to him on the phone, and I was at this point 38 and still did not have my rent paid pretty much. From 20 to 38 in New York City, I did not have my rent paid. I did not have a job. At one point I have a framed certificate from my landlord that says you are now 6 months behind in your rent. God love him. But then there's me crossing off like 250, like crossing off the months. So at one point he said to me when I was talking to him, as he was out here already, he said to me casually, based totally on his own experience, no one in Hollywood takes a 40-year-old story editor seriously. And I didn't even know what that meant, but it rang true to me. I was like, story editor? That's the entry position, and I'm going to be 40. And something happened at the same time, and suddenly I'm typing the script. And what happened was I sent the script out. I had this manager, Barry Secunda, who was like old school New York writer manager. He represented all the Saturday Night Live writers, the originals. He's like this cool, like jazz guy. And he said to me, I said, and I got offered this job. And I said to him, well, he says, you know, you're going out there as the poodle. You're going to be the star's poodle. She requested you. You're going to go out there and you're going to be the poodle. Here comes the poodle. Now, being a poodle is not a bad job. But the idea of like, you're the thing the actress asked for. You're the one who can write for women. You're the poodle. And I also said, what's it going to be like if I go to Hollywood? And he said, Mike, Hollywood's like a game of musical chairs. Only when the music stops, no one's ever out. They just drag in another chair. You're bumping into the same people every year. So I thought, okay, and they offered me the job, and I said, what is going to happen? I felt my life was going to change, and I was terrified of it. I didn't know what. I thought they were going to hold me in California with ropes, like I would never be able to come back to my non-paid rent apartment. I didn't know what was going to happen. But I actually got a new apartment, a first good apartment, put my stuff on the ground, and the call came that you're going to be the poodle. They want you. So I got out on the plane. I thought, here we go. I got right to the studio. She hugged me, and the first thing she said in my ear was, I just quit. So I'm the poodle without this actress. So she quit, but I was there, and I had signed this thing, and the show wasn't working. So immediately I just started writing these crazy scripts, like making up the show. I wrote her goodbye show like 3 days later. And I thought, this is really interesting. 5 shows a week, half-hour shows, just product. And by then, when I joined, all the other writers were dead. There was a writer, a type of Los Angeles writer that I'd never experienced, which was stoned, too relaxed, and older. He was sitting I remember at the first writers meeting I was sitting in, he was sitting on a plastic chair and he had shorts on, those like surfer shorts, those baggy surfer shorts. And I looked down and I thought, why has he got silly putty sitting? Oh, his balls. His balls were out of his shorts laying on the plastic chair. And I thought, that's too relaxed for a writer. That's weird. And he drove a white car. There's so much eccentricity in Hollywood. This was the beginning of it. Like he had a Rolls Royce and shorts, and he was stoned, and he was 50, and he was gay, and he was over it all. And I'm like, what are we writing? You know, it was ridiculous. I have 2 years to make it. And I wound up writing a lot of that stuff. And I had my agent. I got an agent, which gave me another lesson. I came out with an agent named Ari Emanuel. He was a junior agent, since gone on to become quite a legend. But he said, I'll handle you. He was just basically, yeah, sure. He did it as a favor. Whoever you are, I'll handle you. So I got out there and he said to me, okay, you're on the show. So I was like, great, I'm on the show. About the day I opened my bank account, the show got canceled. It was like everything that kept me here. I opened a bank account, the show got canceled. So Ari said to me, write some spec scripts while you're here. I was like, I don't even know what they are. He said, write some spec scripts. I have contacts at In Living Color, which was the hot show. So I was like, what am I going to write for In Living Color? But I decided to write some sketches for In Living Color. And I wrote very important sketches, really, that actually informed another rule, which is like make your own route. I did a thing called Shelf Life, which was a bottle of hair relaxer talking to an old box of hair relaxer and an Afro pick. And they were talking about the person and who was going to choose what and get ready because you're out of, I'm old. And, it was basically black hair care products come to life. I wrote 2 mounted policemen called Officer Mars and Officer Rollo for the Wayans brothers, which were gorgeous, narcissistic cops who would never help any girl unless they were pretty. And then the horses were shitting through the whole thing. And they kept looking at their reflections in their mirrors. And the last thing I wrote was Connecticut Family Safari, which was a black family going through a wilderness safari of Connecticut, where they were throwing pesto and rackets at the car. And I wrote these because I thought these are what I would write. And I started to type the spec script for something called Murphy Brown. Like that seemed right. Like I didn't even know, okay, Murphy Brown. But as soon as I finished the spec scripts, I got a call to go for, the big lesson, and this is the big lesson I want to tell writers. I finished my spec scripts, sketches, and I brought them to Ari. And he really didn't know me. And he starts to read them in front of me. And I said, oh, you're not reading those in front of me. No, you're going to sit down and read those. I'm not going to sit here while you pass right in front of me. And it made him sort of sit up. And it was like, yeah, you're not going to just, I worked on those. You're just not going to treat them like they're your lunch order. And I stood up for those scripts, but I really stood up for myself, which is the first time I think that he ever thought, oh, who is this person who's standing up for themselves? Rather than just, please read my scripts. Anyway, I got a call to go to this show called Good Sports, Ellen Zweibel's show. Another show that they considered was not working, even though it was a very high profile show. It was Ryan O'Neal and Farrah Fawcett as a sportscasters, Pat and Mike sort of Tracy Hepburn thing. Ellen Zweibel, the hottest writer coming off It's Gary Shandling show. And I had only spec scripts, these sketches. And they read the sketches and they liked the sketches enough to bring me in. I didn't even know the experience of what I was experiencing. I went into a room, they showed me the pilot. They said to me, what do you think? I didn't know who any of them were. And I said, well, this doesn't work and this could be better and this could be better. And then Alan Zweibel hired me on the spot. And one of the other co-executive producers looked at me and said, this doesn't happen. This doesn't happen. And I was like, okay. They go, no, this doesn't happen. You have to understand what happened now doesn't happen. You didn't even have a spec script. You told them you didn't like parts of the show. This doesn't happen. So I left and I called Ari and I said, I just got offered this job. And he was like, that's huge because that's a network comedy. And the next day I had a meeting with the In Living Color and they offered me a job too. And I went with CBS, which was interesting because I've always been with CBS, but that was a big experience as well because that show brought up all my insecurities. Being on writing staff with those guys brought up all my metal, really brought it up. It was just like, who are you? What are you doing with your life? Get tough, stand up for, I mean, being on staff is really interesting, especially when you're the new one and the young one on staff and you want so well to excel. And for the first time, you're being told, put it in a box. Everything that got you here, the outrageousness of what you wrote, now has to be put in a file. It was a very confusing experience. And it actually got canceled after one season, but I wrote one script out of it, which was it's so interesting how kind of random it can be with skill attached. I wrote one of the characters was a golf pro, a female golf pro. So I wrote this crazy golf themed show, which was about someone, a caddy, and a dysfunctional relationship between a sexual relationship between a caddy and like the postman always rings twice, crazy sex on the floor, a caddy and a golfer. And it was all golf themed. And that was the show the script that went to Murphy Brown that Steve Peterman read. And because he's a golfer, was like, oh, a golf show. Like, I'm a golfer. I'm not a golfer. But the fact that it was about golf amused him enough to be interested enough to notice the writing and then to give it to Diane English, who then thought, that's interesting. And then they brought me in for my meeting. I also, right after that show went down, here's another lesson. Ari called me up and I said, I don't know what I'm going to do next. And he said, I got you an interview over at Coach, which was a sitcom about a coach. And I said, I'm not right for Coach. And he said, you just sit your ass on that show for a couple of years and make some money. And I said, you're fired. And I left because I knew I wasn't going to sit my ass on Coach for a couple of years. I didn't know what I was going to do, and it was interesting because I walked away from Ari and it made him sit up too, like, wow, and then I got Murphy Brown right after that. And I had a whole new agency. I had a job to go to an agency, but it's really about following your own path. Don't do what is against your natural. I knew I would fail on Coach. I knew it. I'm not going to write around and say, Coach, read my life. It's not going to be about Coach. It's going to be about something else. And then Diane English asked me to come in for a meeting on Murphy Brown. And I was on and doing my thing and very energized and excited to be there. And after the meeting, I got a call from somebody who I had worked on Good Sports with, who had worked on that show. They want to see you again and they want to know if you can listen. So I guess I was on and energized and talking too much, and can you listen? So I went in for another meeting where I was more sedate, more room friendly, as I would now understand the term. And Diane said to me, come in with some lines, some story ideas. Come back one more meeting with 5 story ideas. And here's a weird other thing. So I knew I was close to getting this job. And I remember come back in again, like in a couple of days with some story ideas. And I remember not doing it, like not thinking about it. And I actually remember laying down on a bed in the middle of the afternoon. And it was almost like thinking, like somebody pulled me like by my shirt and said, you can't not excel here. You've got to do it. You have to really work for this. Because I was sort of like going to throw it around. But I had learned another lesson right before I got the Comedy Channel. There was a sketch show in town. Somebody said, just bang out some stuff over the weekend and send it in. So I did bang out some sketches over the weekend. And guess what? When you bang out some sketches over the weekend, they're not so good. And then you get rated on that work. And that's when I learned my other rule, which is like, there's no curve. What you hand them is who you are. You don't get a curve in writing. It's not like, I bet you can do better. He only banged them out over the weekend. What's on the page is who you are. So I tell people this all the time, what you're handing me is who I think you are as a writer. I always say, is this the best version of this you can hand me? Because you don't get credit. It doesn't matter. I'm looking for writing on the page. It's not about how nice you are or how fun you are. But that's where I learned that lesson. You can't just walk through a script like guessing. You have to do your very best, and then you can still fail, but at least you've done your best. So I thought up 5 ideas, really complex ideas. I went into Diane English, her and I. She said to me, give me one of your ideas. And I remember the first idea I pitched, I thought I was done, and she said, that's the second scene. Now what? And I was like, oh, this is bigger than just a thought. It's like, how do you make this move? And out of the 5 ideas I pitched her, my first 5 scripts in the series were those ideas. And the first idea was the new men's movement, where it was Murphy has to cover the new men's movement, which was about drumming, and Robert Bly, and about how men have drums, these corporate guys trying to be animals. And she said, I really love that idea. I just don't think anyone really is aware of that yet. And the very first week I started on Murphy Brown on the cover of Newsweek was the new men's movement. And Diane said, you got your first show. So it's really about constantly what's in the air. Especially if you're writing television, like what's in the air? What is happening? What's current? I mean, I think that's exciting about television, because you can actually be writing about what's happening because it's so immediate.
For someone who's never seen Murphy Brown, can you just describe the premise of the show?
Yeah, Murphy Brown is a show based on a character named Murphy Brown, who was the Diane Sawyer of her fictional television world, whose backstory was that she was returning in the pilot after being in rehab for being an alcoholic. And it's really about an opinionated woman's point of view of the world. And it's about a woman with balls. And it was played by Candice Bergen. So it was an amazing combination of like beauty and balls. And Diane English's brilliant brain for that character. It was really it was considered, really, at the time I was there. I joined the big Dan Quayle year. There was this big scandal. And that was the year that I actually joined when Murphy had her baby. It was their 5th year. It was Diane's last, my first. And it was like getting a job at Yale. Or like it was the mecca of writers, because it was about writing. And it was a very, very studious room. Peter Tolan and I joined at the same time. It was about writing. So if you were in that room, you were considered to be a writer. And the other interesting thing about Murphy Brown, I started as an executive story editor, and I wasn't 40. But the interesting thing about it is I was exactly the same as an executive story editor at Murphy Brown as I am now as an executive producer of my own stuff. There's no tier. I don't think people should behave per their title. I think you should hire everybody for their voice and hear it. And the title is something that, the studio systems have created. But I don't think your spirit should be ghettoed to you're an executive story editor. You just give a third of what you think. You should give it all, just because your title's that. So at Murphy Brown, Diane was brilliant in creating a utopia where everybody was powerful.